Greetings. My name is Ernest Owens, and I am the proud host and executive producer of Ernestly Speaking with Ernest Owens myself. Today is a big day. This season is a big season. As you all know, this is an election special on what's at stake. Right now, we have an upcoming primary, a Democratic primary that is taking place on April 23rd. That is Tuesday, April 23rd, right here in Pennsylvania. And this primary is big. There's going to be a lot at stake because this is 2024. The 2024 election is already here, which is surprising because I'm thinking to myself, wow, I feel like we were just having a conversation about 2020. Like the country was shutting down around this time in the spring. We were actually sending ballots by mail. A lot of people weren't doing in-person voting. And now we are 4 years past that, and now we're back at it again. Everything's on the table this election cycle. There's a lot to discuss. There's a lot of issues that have happened since 2020. Reproductive rights is being, put on stake. Affirmative action, DEI, all of these really major issues. Immigration is being discussed. So there's a lot. There's a lot, and we're going to use this episode to get into it. So for starters, before we can even talk about anything else, are you registered to vote? That's the real question. Are you registered to vote right now? A lot of Philadelphians actually are. But whether or not they're actually voting is another question, right? Voter turnout can always be better. But registered voting right now is important. If you want to vote right now in the 2024 primaries in Pennsylvania on April 23rd, the deadline is April 8th. April 8th is the deadline. If you do not register to vote by April 8th, then you cannot vote in this upcoming primary. Now, let's say that for whatever reasons that you might forget. Just remember April 8th, which is basically roughly 2 weeks before the actual primary election, which is going to be on Tuesday, April 23rd. So what's great about that is that once you register to vote for the primary, you don't have to worry about registering to vote for the general election, which will be on November 5th. So might as well go ahead and register now. Might as well vote in the primary so that when it comes to November 5th, which is the general election, which is the election that will determine our next president, will determine our next, U.S. senator in Pennsylvania, will determine our next, attorney general. All of that is on the table. All of that matters. And it starts here. So some people are asking the $1 million question, right? Why should I vote? Why should I participate in this upcoming primary? Because this primary will determine who gets on the ballot for the general elections. So just because you see a Democrat or a couple of people that you personally like, you might say, oh, I'll vote for you in the general. Well, will that person be on the ballot in November? Will that person actually be an option? Ask yourself that question. Will that person actually be able to get your vote? So if there are candidates that you're liking and you're interested in, it's really important for you to vote for them in the primary to make sure that you're doing your part to help them get to the general. Because if you don't, the likelihood, anything can happen. And so there are some questions about competitive races. What I will say is that on this upcoming April 23rd ballot on Tuesday, the presidential candidates are pretty much set in stone. The candidates, the people that are actually, participating. Those people are, of course, for the Republican Party is Donald Trump, former President Donald Trump. The current incumbent and also running for re-election is President Joe Biden, who is a Democrat. And then there also are third-party options, some of which are not maybe on some ballots across the country. There are different primaries that have taken place already. New Hampshire has happened, Nevada, other places. But Pennsylvania is on the lower end of what is considered a Super Tuesday cluster. So we are one of the last states to actually do a primary. As you all have been following the primary, a lot of the energy was focused on Republicans because this time around, they are not in presidential power right now. So they have a lot of people that was gunning for the spot. In the end, former President Donald Trump came out on top. His biggest challenger was Nikki Haley, who is the former governor of South Carolina and also a former ambassador, UN ambassador, who was appointed by Trump. Now they are budding rivals in this political discourse. So it's very important for people to really understand why this election is very important. For the first time in modern history, two former presidents, well, one current president and another president, two basically presidents are going head to head. Both of these men have already held the seat as commander in chief of the United States of America. They've already had this, this powerful role. So it's a little different. And there's been conversations about voter enthusiasm. Are people going to go to the polls? Are people going to be excited? And there are a lot of polls that suggest that people did not want this rematch between Biden and Trump. A lot of reported journalism and data has shown that a lot of American voters are not enthusiastic about either of these two going in this matchup, with the current president, Biden, having mixed views in the polls around how they feel about his job performance. However, it should be noted that enthusiasm for the individual candidates do not necessarily speak to voter enthusiasm and actually voting. Polls have showed that voters are pretty much have made up their mind to a larger extent on whether or not they're going to vote. And a lot of them do intend to vote and want to vote because they do take the issue serious. And so what is very important about this episode of Ernestly Speaking is that we should take note that the conversation is what's at stake. What are the issues, right? Because that's what really drives voters. As a millennial Black queer, voter, I'm driven to the polls not behind the candidates. Granted, there are some candidates that are running for various seats, not just for president, that deeply concern me. But that is not the only reason why I am taking this election seriously. There has been some decisions made by the Supreme Court that has concerned me. And there's also the actual possibility that other issues might come on the table by the Supreme Court. And we need to make sure that we have a president, a leader, a Congress, a Senate that is really much fortified with leadership that can help make decisions. So Philadelphia is a predominantly Democratic area, but there are some statewide races that are competitive Democratic races that I think should be discussed because some of these races aren't as competitive. Some of these races are respectfully not as historic. A lot of these people are predictors and then, for the sake of respecting time and also your interest, we're going to focus on some of the competitive races and those that are historic. So let's get to it. The U.S. Senate race is pretty much a no-dealer for Democrats. Senator Bob Casey is up for re-election, and it's pretty much a prediction that he's going to pretty much win the nomination, Democratic nomination. Now, the general election is very different, and when we have the election special for the general race in the fall, I predict that's going to happen. We'll talk a little bit more about that race because he'll be going against a Republican, and it might be a very heated race and a very unpredictable race. So, right now for the Democratic primary and for those in this predominantly Democratic city, Bob Casey is most likely going to get the Democratic nomination, and that's statewide because he doesn't really have any challengers, respectfully. Now, it gets a little different. Pretty much Congress is the same. People like, so let me also clarify this. Some people might ask, well, what about current U.S. Senator John Fetterman? So these are staggered Senate races. Senators get to have 6 years in office. They run every 6 years, but it's staggered. So Bob Casey's up for re-election this year, but Senator John Fetterman is up in 4 years. So it's very staggered within Senate races. However, when it comes to congressional races and state rep races, they run every 2 years. So your congressperson has to run every 2 years, which can be exhausting. So whenever you hear that someone is a 10-term incumbent, that means they serve for 10 years. If they say that they are a 12-year incumbent, that means 24 years. And there have been people in Pennsylvania that have served 24 years in office. I think current Philadelphia Democratic City Committee Chairman Bob Brady has served for like over 20-something plus years in the U.S. Congress. So that's not a shocker. I think about people like former Congressman Shaka Fattah. He had served many years. But then you have people like current Congressman Dwight Evans, who is pretty much, was a freshman for a couple years. I think this is maybe his 4th or 6th year in office. So there is interesting levels. Now, he served as a state rep for many, many years. So, what he did not have in congressional years, he had in state house years. So that should be duly noted. But pretty much all the Democratic incumbents are going to get the nomination. It will be interesting to see what will happen in some of their respective districts when it comes to Republicans. But that's something that should be also noted. Now, going down, the big hot ticket Democratic race, the most competitive race, in my opinion. Before I get into that, I want to talk about other races that are also not as competitive. Now, there is a competitive race for the treasurer. There are two Democrats going head to head. That is Aaron McClendon and Ryan Bizzarro that are going for the race. They're both from the larger pockets outside. They're not in Philadelphia based. Some of them are in the suburbs and outward. But it is a statewide race. Democratic voters from all across Pennsylvania will get a chance to participate, not just Philadelphians. But this is a Philadelphia-centric regional show. So yes, we want to talk about how Philadelphia voters are going to obviously vote. It looks like we don't know. I mean, if I was a betting man, maybe Ryan Bizzarro might get it based on the number of endorsements. But, maybe Aaron McClendon might pull it off. We don't know how that race might pull off. But we're going to see. We're going to watch. We're going to see. But it is a competitive race. So it is important for voters to make sure that when it comes to this this Pennsylvania treasurer race, make sure that you really research both of these candidates and look at the issues, look who's endorsing them, look who they're aligned with, because that is a competitive race. Now, the race for Auditor General, it's pretty much a surefire prediction that current state representative Malcolm Kenyatta will win the nomination. He's gotten backed by the state party, the Pennsylvania Democratic State Committee, which is led by current Pennsylvania State Senator, who is also who's leading it, is Sharif Street. The endorsement went to Malcolm Kenyatta, and he's going to make history as the first openly gay Democrat to get a major statewide nomination. Not just a nomination, but the party nomination. He will be the first openly gay Pennsylvania state candidate as a Democrat to get that nomination. Historic. It's going to be history making. He is going to be, I would predict he's going to make history. Anything can happen, but it's pretty much clear that he's going to get the Democratic nomination to run for Auditor General. Now, in November, he's going to have a serious race because the Republican in office, Timothy DeFleur, is a incumbent. He's also a historic making Black elected official. As a Republican, Timothy DeFleur, who is a sitting Auditor General, made history in 2020, 4 years ago. He made history as the first Black elected official or candidate to ever win a statewide race in Pennsylvania history. Okay, a Black candidate. It didn't matter, Democrat or Republican. He was a Republican, but he's the first to ever win a statewide seat in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. That's a pretty big deal. Pretty big deal. And for anyone, regardless of political affiliation, as a Black voter, as someone who is a Black Pennsylvanian, it was historic. Now, Democrats definitely sped up and made current Lieutenant Governor Austin Davis the second Black candidate in Pennsylvania history to win a statewide seat, and he won for Lieutenant Governor and became the first ever, of course, obviously, the first ever Black Lieutenant Governor in Pennsylvania history. So history has been made. But if Malcolm Kenyatta wins in November, he will be the first openly gay candidate to ever win a statewide seat, and the third Black candidate to ever win a statewide seat. So there's a lot of historical nuance and potential history-making moments here in this particular election on the state level. It's a big deal, and we should really take this race seriously. So that's a race. So Treasurer, Auditor General, those are the big ones. But the main event, the race that we've all been waiting for, the one that we cannot stop talking about, the one that that's been keeping me up at night, is the Attorney General race. This race is so loaded. There's so many people with experience from all parts of Pennsylvania, so much conversation. I get goosebumps just thinking about it. So this race is a race with 5 Democrats going for the top job. 5 Democrats are in this race. We have Jack Salsemeyer. I might be butchering his name. He is currently the Delaware County, district attorney. You also have Jared Solomon, who is a former state rep, who has apparently, as of right now, the most money in the race. You also have Keir Bradford Gray, who is a former she was a former chief defender, public defender for Pennsylvania and Delaware County. She holds both of those, or Montgomery County, I believe, Montgomery County. She holds 2 major positions, and she's making history because she is the first major competitive Black female candidate to run for this AG race on the state level. But she's also the only woman in the race, which is also something notable. Also following her is Eugene D. Pasquale, who is also a former statewide winner and elected official. He was previously the Auditor General for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Now he is running for Attorney General. And then last but not least, Joe Kahn, who is a known, prosecutor and a lawyer attorney. He is known largely for running against Larry Krasner when Larry Krasner ran for his first term. He was a former Philadelphia district attorney, district attorney candidate. I'm getting all my attorneys and all my generals a little confused. But he is a former Philadelphia DA candidate who previously ran and lost. Interesting enough, he came in second place in that race following, coming after Krasner. And so since then, he's went on to continue to practice law and do his thing. And now here he is running for this big title. So there's 5 major candidates. They're very interesting. Many of them are getting different endorsements. It should be noted that neither of these candidates have been nominated by the Democratic State Committee. That's a pretty big deal, people. Please take note. So for some of you on that might say, well, whoever's going to get the statewide endorsement is going to win. That wasn't the case. The delegates, so the endorsement process within the Pennsylvania State Committee is a pretty big deal. Delegates from respective counties all come together to coalesce over a particular candidate. They have to decide as a statewide unit, who do they like and who do they want to vote for? And you can check them out and check out endorsements details on vote.pa.gov to go online and know more information. Please check that out right there. Go there and check them out and find out more information. But none of those 5 Democratic candidates received an endorsement. Did not get an endorsement by the party, which means that this is really an open race. And it also should be noted, for those who don't already know, is that the former Attorney General was our current governor, Josh Shapiro. And he left in the middle of his term, which then created a vacancy. And that vacancy was taken by a woman who is currently the interim. So we have an interim AG who is not running for re-election, and that's normally the case. So this is an open race. Our AG in 2025, whoever gets sworn in and get elected, will be a brand new person who has never been in this seat. And there is some history here, because if Keir Bradford Gray wins, he becomes the first Black Attorney General in Pennsylvania history. Pretty big deal. Darn deal. And what's also interesting about these candidates is that, in her role, she will be making history because she is not a prosecutor. She is a public defender. And it's been interesting throughout the race that people have been having these conversations, like, what would it look like to have a public defender, in this role, serving as the AG, especially around conversations around criminal justice reform and other matters. It would be interesting. But you also have people who are like Joe Kahn, who's been getting some momentum. But then you also have someone like Jared Solomon, who has had a boat ton of money in this race. But then you also have people like, Eugene D. Pasquale, who has had statewide success. It's very interesting to see who can win. Now, what I will say that's very interesting as well is that we need to pay attention to this race because, 1, it's very competitive, but 2, the fact that the Democratic State Committee could not coalesce behind endorsing one particular candidate over the other, that reminds me of 2 years ago when it was the U.S. Senate race. and people were trying to figure out who was going to represent Pennsylvania. And it was between John Fetterman and then Congressman, um, goodness, what happened to him? Uh, I completely forgot who the former congressman was who ran. It's been that long. But, Fetterman had an opponent, right, who was a former congressman. And, both of them had their own successes. But Fetterman had statewide success. He was a lieutenant governor at the time. And his opponent, Connor Lamb, it just got to me. Connor Lamb. What's happened to Connor Lamb? We didn't even hear from Connor Lamb. I remember initially when covering that race, there was speculation that Connor Lamb was going to be potentially running for AG. And that has not been the case. We have not heard from Connor Lamb since his primary defeat in 2022. But here we are in 2024. And I remember that race because there were a lot of Democrats who had supported Connor Lamb, but he did not have enough delegates to actually win the nomination, which then made me realize this is an open race. This is a complicated race. And even if certain Democrats in certain areas endorse Connor Lamb, that doesn't mean he's going to win. Now, in Philadelphia, we do have a lion's share of influence on how elections shape up, even in the general election. But in this situation, it is an open race and it is unpredictable. And I encourage voters to really look up these candidates. Look up really great, credible journalism voter guides from actual legitimate news sources. Do your work to look at who they're getting endorsed. Look at their positions. Look at community groups and advocacy groups and what their positions are on certain candidates, because all of this is going to make a big difference in how we decide to vote on April 23rd and how we vote on November 5th. Now, I want to take a moment to talk about the state rep races. Now, specifically state rep races in Philadelphia. To be honest, most of these races are not really competitive. And what I mean by that is the Democrats don't have a challenger. So they're pretty much going to win. And honestly, a lot of them are going to most likely in Philadelphia County are going to win their seats in November because the ratio, I think, is 6-7 or something like that. But the overwhelming number of Democratic voters when it comes to, these type of city determined races. So state rep races are not statewide. State senator races are not also statewide. So AG is statewide because everybody has to vote for an attorney general. Everybody has to vote for an auditor general. Everybody has to vote for a treasurer, right? And those are the races on the ballot. Now, governor, gubernatorial, lieutenant gubernatorial races, those races, and even some state senator races, and even the current state senator, even the current U.S. senator race, right? All of those are statewide. And so that's why we're focusing on that for this primary. And we're going to talk a lot about that in the general. But when it comes to state rep races, right, that is district. And if any districts in Philadelphia County, and even in the respective surrounding suburbs, largely that is going to be still Democratic controlled. However, there are two particular races that I want to talk about because those are the races that I think are the most interesting. So currently in the 10th district, which is in West Philadelphia, which is actually near my district, there is a heated race for that seat. There are 3 candidates running. It is current incumbent, this is Democrats, Amin Brown. There is also Saj Purple Blackwell. And there is also Cass Green. Now, they're all registered Democrats, but they all come from different sectors. Amin Brown is being endorsed by the Democratic City Committee. He is a ward leader. He is an incumbent. He has served in his position. He's finishing his second term. So he'll be entering his third term if reelected. Saj Purple Blackwell is a long time, she is I believe a block captain. I think she might be a committee person at one point. She's a Democrat. This is her second time running for this seat in particular. She ran against Amin Brown when he ran for reelection in 2022. She lost. But she is someone who has some sway, and her last name is Blackwell. She is married to someone who is related to former city council member Janie Blackwell. So she has a little bit of sway in her own right. And then last but not least, there is Cass Green, who also ran in in 2022 against Almond Brown. She came in second in the race and was the closest to him in the race. She's also running for re-election. Now, what's interesting about her is that she's getting endorsed by the Working Families Party, and there's a coalition of certain progressives within the Working Families Party that is trying to push her up for victory. So there is a lot of competition right now that's taking place within this respective race. If I was a betting man, if I was a betting voter, I think that Almond Brown has a strong likelihood of being reelected. However, you never know. Elections are very tricky, and there is a lot of different energies because, it should be noted that Brown ran for mayor last year. And you all remember that wonderful election special here at Philly Cam, hosted by yours truly, where we interviewed those candidates and about the issues. He did not do that well in his mayoral bid, but he did continue to do the work as a state rep, and now he's running again for re-election. It's going to be interesting how voters will feel, but it looks like he has the momentum in his favor. And, getting a Democratic endorsement in a district race does have a major role. So it'll be interesting to see. And then last but not least, I want to talk about a race in Germantown. There is a state rep race in Germantown that is pretty much started with 3 candidates and has now ended with just 1. But the reason why I bring up this race is because history is going to be made. Candidate Andre Carroll, who is a registered Democrat and is running for the Democratic Party, is going to make history as the second openly gay Black candidate to win in the state house. It's very historic. The first to ever do it was current state rep Malcolm Kenyatta. Andre Carroll is going to be the second to do it. And what's interesting about him is that this is his second time running for the seat. Unlike Kenyatta, he doesn't come from an establishment base of support. This is someone who earned the Democratic nomination. He is nominated by the Democratic Party, but he did not start with that nomination. He's had to navigate various challenges. He's had to nominate various challenges as a person who is from Germantown, who is from the community, who did not get the type of political grooming that someone like a Malcolm Kenyatta had. So it is very different. When Malcolm Kenyatta ran, I would believe back in 2018 for state rep, it was a very different type of environment and culture. It was a very different type of audience. And what's very important about that race was that it was pretty much a given. Like, it was a given. People really was like, he's going to get it, because the party really rallied behind him. Deals were made on the table. It was a given. For Andre Carroll, that wasn't the case. He had to really build on his relationships. He had to really seek, guidance, counsel, mentorship from people within the progressive spaces and different spaces. And he is also endorsed by the Working Families Party. So for him to be able, at such a young age, he is 33 years old, to get this nomination, and pretty much he is going to win. There are no more challengers in his race, is a pretty big darn deal. So, as we wrap up this important special for the primary, the big notes to remember is April 23rd is the big day. That will be Tuesday. April 23rd is voting day. Make sure you register to vote. The deadline to register is April 8th. Make sure that you're registered to vote. April 8th is the deadline. Monday, April 8th is the deadline. So make sure you register to vote. Make sure you do vote. Make sure that you check out these various websites to understand more about the candidates and understand what is important and what's at stake. Make sure that you look at credible journalism sources. Philly Cam is a wonderful platform to be able to get information about the election and know what to vote and know what's going on. And of course, you can check out our website, phillycam.org, to get more information about election day information and making sure you know where to vote. PhillyCam.org is an incredible source to get information to know more about this election. And check out your various local outlets as well if you want to know more about some of the issues around these candidates, because this is an important year. 2024 is a presidential election year. 2024 is a very consequential year. I know you might hear that every other time, but this is currently the most consequential election of our time. And with that being said, be well and be best.